that we've been running. We are excited to welcome you to GAISE-Aligned Pedagogy and Online Statistics courses. This workshop is about structuring opportunities for student discourse, interaction, and collaboration. I am joined with Anelise Sabbag and Beth Chance from Cal Poly. And my colleague Laura Kellis will not be able to join us, but we represent Curry College in just outside of Boston, Massachusetts. I'm going to stop sharing and allow Anelise to take over as we welcome you and get us started talking about interactions in online courses.
All right, thank you very much. So let's get started here. I'm going to share this. All right. So we're going to get started and talk about some of the plans for the workshop. We want to hear from you about what are some of the things that you have been doing in terms of interactions in your online course. Then we're going to go through some examples of things that we've done in our course, and we're focusing on discussion forums and collaborative keys. We're going to give time for questions about each one of those topics, and we're going to end up with some breakout rooms and some engagement that we can try it ourselves or see what we notice in terms of interactions. Here, the first thing that we're looking for is we want to hear from you in terms of what type of interactions between instructor and students do you value and want to see happen in your course? So we would like to try to type the answer to this question in the chat, but wait to send it until we say so. Okay, so just give us what type of interactions between the instructor and students you want to see in your course. And then we're going to say go, and then you provide your answer in the chat. Okay, so we're going to give you a couple of seconds for you to get started thinking about the answer. All right, is this enough time? Yes? All right, so when I say yes, when I say go, please paste your answer to the chat. So 1, 2, 3, go. Please do it. All right, so we have some questions here. Thank you for all of you who posted. So we have discussions that get at meaning, maybe meaningful meaning of concepts. Reach out to me for help. A proactive reach out to my students. That's awesome. Ask questions when they need help. Aha moment. Deep interactions. Those are all great suggestions. Question about why instead of how. Help with projects, ideas, and follow through. I love those. Discussion and statistical ideas is so important. Students need time to practice talking about those. I love this. Thank you for doing this. Yeah, these are some great ideas. So I think most of us is interested in this idea of like, well, yes, we want to communicate with our students. We want our students to be able to communicate with us. And then the type of setting that we do this is sometimes a little bit hard, right? So like, how can we make this happen in an online class? And then Jen and Beth, feel free to join in the conversation if you have anything to add. Should I move on to the next question? Okay, here's the next question. What types of interactions do you want to see between students? What type of those interactions do you value and want to see happening in your course? And how can you support those interactions? So think about your answer. When I say go, then please provide your answers in the chat. So I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to do this. So what type of interactions between students do you value and you want to see happen in your course? And and if you don't have any of those ideas, it's totally fine to say, I don't know. I'm here for some help. But we would love to hear from you. Like, what have you been doing? All right, waiting a little bit more. All right, so when I say go, please provide your answer in the chat. So 1, 2, 3, go. Thank you for everyone that is providing their answers. Oh, direct interactions and not written. I like that. So instead of one student answering everything right away and making others feel anxious about not knowing right away, encouraging all students to interact with each other. I love this. Helping each other with the statistical ideas and interpretations. bouncing ideas off each other without the teacher being the final say, oh, that is awesome. I think they learn a lot when they have to debate each other. Those are all some great ideas. So they're debating each other here. Co-creative interactions and co-creating knowledge and understanding, putting on each other's idea. I really like that too. Using hedging language and questioning each other, supporting each other's. You're all doing great. Those are all awesome ideas. Supporting each other's learning discussion on how concepts relate to their lives. Then in a synchronous discussion forums, yeah, we're going to talk a lot about that. Form a community remotely. The best feedback was, I made friends in your remote class. Oh, nice. I made more friends in your remote class than in your face-to-face class. This is a good comment to receive. I like to see students helping each other to understand concepts. What about interactions between students and AI? Oh, yes. Oh, the whole topic of AI is interesting. And I've seen some people doing some, I haven't adventured in that setting yet, but I've seen some instructors here at Cal Poly doing pretty good. So thank you for sharing this with us. I think most of us are on the same boat regarding all of this, and I'm excited that you already have some great ideas. So, due to just making sure we're keeping track with time, we're going to move on and we're going to talk about um, idea of what do we want to see in an online course, right? So everything that you just posted, yes, we want to see those in face to face, and yes, we want to see those in an online course. So the idea that we talked about in the previous workshop last Friday about active learning, and we talked about how we can create activities that will encourage students to talk with each other instead of just passively receiving information. We still want to see interactions between professor and the students, collaboration among the students, and in an online course we want to be even like more creative in how we do our assessments, right? So we want to have the typical assessments that we do: homework, exams, projects, even sometimes some of those being in a group setting. But we also want to think about what assignments or assessments we can have that the students can learn the statistical concepts as they are completing those assignments, right? So these are some of the ideas that we're going to provide for you today. The importance of interaction, I think most of us that are here, we kind of got it. There is a lot under research about how we want students to be able to interact with each other. We want students to create a sense of community, even in an online class. And we want students to be able to construct knowledge together, either by in discussions or debating their own side of whatever question they have. So we want to see all of those in your online class. If we talk about in person, that is pretty straightforward. Like a lot of us use like maybe a small group discussion, we assign students to group and we give them some side of task to do, or we can even do a whole class discussion. But when it comes to online, we're a little bit stuck here, right? Because like, how can we do this maybe in a synchronous format or in an asynchronous format? And it will vary and it's not as straightforward. So what we're going to talk about is all of those ideas they already talked about in GAISE, right? And GAISE focus on the idea, let's foster interaction between students. Let's get them to collaborate. Let's focus on conceptual understanding. Let's teach statistical thinking. And specifically in GAISE, they do talk about discussion forums. And Jen is going to talk a lot about this, helping us to see what are some ways that we can use discussion forums in an effective way. So they give examples of help students to connect with each other, critique some sort of analysis or some question and answer assignments. They also talk in GAISE about cooperative learning. So there is a lot of research that was done in this area. And we want students to work together. They have the shared goal or completing the assignment, but we want still students to be able to be individually accountable for everything that they are doing. And we can do this through theme-based learning, collaborative activities, guided investigations. There are a couple of different ways that we can do it. So what we're going to move on now is the first presenter, Jen, is going to help us understand a little bit more about discussion forums. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and good to go.
Thank you. So unfortunately, you don't get the other half of the Curry College dynamic duo of Laura Callis. But we teach at Curry College, which is proudly neurodiverse. We really embrace the idea that our students come with a whole diversity in terms of their learning experiences and past experiences with mathematics and with other subjects too. And we are a welcoming and embracing place where students expect inclusive instruction. And so that pushes each of us as instructors to think carefully about the design of our courses in order to ensure that we're removing as many barriers as possible for students to engage in the ways that we value. So just as Anelise said, each statistics course has its own flavor. So maybe you're teaching a course in a discipline, maybe you're teaching a course in the math department. Each one of those is going to have slightly different goals or slightly different directions. And the learning outcomes are going to be based on what it is that you want students to achieve by the end of the semester. And so those learning outcomes are going to vary for each of us. So what I say here may resonate with you, but it may not. So some of the tools that I'll share, some of the approaches come from my worldview of teaching an introductory stats course that is used to prepare students for the next course of study in their major. So we treat, our service department at Curry, and we teach intro stats, and almost every student at Curry takes intro stats as their math requirement, and then they go on to further study in psychology or business and so on. So we take this view that students should be developing conceptual understanding of inference, and that's where we place our value and that's where we place our time. But other classes may want to focus differently. Maybe you want to look more at statistical literacy, being able to unpack what some research articles are showing, the methods that were used, and things of that sort. So the first thing that I'm going to show you is a tool, because sometimes what we face is that the discussion board format itself is not conducive to the type of interactions that we're looking for. So in a course where you may want students to collaboratively read and critique or unpack a research article, you might need a tool that's different from the discussion forum that's in Canvas or your learning management system. One of those tools is Perusall, which is free for instructors, and you can upload your own content into Perusall that students will use as a social sharing site all around a text. There are also textbooks that are available for students to purchase the ebook version that's already built into Perusall, so you can collaboratively read and comment on text together. So Perusall loads, and it can be embedded in Canvas and several other learning management systems, so it can be integrated with the gradebook and things like that. And it will load the text of your choice, and students will have the opportunity to have threaded responses in line with the text. So you can pose questions directly on the text. Students can answer the same question and thread their responses and reply to different classmates as they go. And you get aggregated reports of what students are talking about, where they're talking about it, and any questions that bubble up that you can address more holistically. So I'm here to say that if you have goals for students to do some of this collaborative work around text, there are tools out there that will support that, because sometimes it's hard to sort of break from the only tools that we know in order to see the possibilities of what we could be doing with students. This allows students to make affective responses, so they can talk about the context or the authentic issues in text that you provide, but it also gives you opportunity to look at the quantitative discussions that can happen too. Students can unpack the different methods and findings of research articles, and you can use this tool to assign text to groups or as a whole class activity as well. All right. Perusall is free for students as well. So the only charge to students is if you adopt a textbook that is Perusall embedded, and students would generally just be paying the license to the textbook. You can upload your own articles or other artifacts, and it would be free in that case. I hope that answers the question. All right. I know that discussion boards are another tool that we use in order to get students to collaborate with each other and have the opportunity for us to collaborate with them and to discuss ideas. Again, when I think about discussion boards and discussion forums, I start with what my learning goals are and what my goals for interaction are. And I think it's hard when you're, entering into an online space from fully in person to think about just how explicit you need to be about sharing your expectations for what students will do. So I always err on the side of providing way more detail than students may need, but I find that students really do need that level of detail sometimes. So if I'm expecting something from my students in their discussion board responses, I want to be very clear about what that is so that what could have been answered in a really dynamic and quick interaction in an in-person class, we don't have that luxury in an online class always. So the more detailed you can be about what your expectations are, what you expect students' work product to look like, and even when they're going to post and respond to each other, I think can really make the most benefit from your discussion forums as possible. Again, start with your goals and then make sure that you're building out the structures that are going to match those goals and elicit from students the type of interaction that you are hoping to see. Let's see. So discussion boards can be used for a number of different ways. You can check students' understanding of statistical ideas. You can have students practice communicating statistical thinking. And hopefully it's a way to replicate that student-to-student interaction that you would find in the in-class experience. So when students talk in class, a lot of times they're trying to formulate ideas and to practice using the language of statistics to communicate. And I think that sometimes in an online class, we don't have as many opportunities for that practice in that low stakes environment. And so if you can structure your discussion boards to be low stakes, to allow students to go back and revise their answer or go back and respond to themselves if they find that they have a better understanding of something after looking at the interactions with each other, I think that that can sort of build in those same behavioral expectations that you're expecting from your students. Along with that, if you can define what it is that you want students to do, and you define very clearly your expectations for what their product will be and how they interact with each other, the assessment of that should also mirror that too, so that students know and see that you value discussion and interaction, and you have these specific goals for them. And their grade, for at least the discussion part, is dependent on them actually using the statistical thinking and having student-to-student interaction. So these are two examples of some of the rubrics that we've used that value not only the student's first attempt at explaining the idea, but also that building of community or responding to ideas or highlighting things that may be common or may cause a question to come up for students. And I think that that's a real healthy way to get students to notice and respond to misconceptions that may come up. So I just saw a question in the chat. Do students have to interact with each other? Yes. And students, even if they have a wonderful understanding of statistics, one of the values that I have and one of the learning outcomes for our course actually is that students communicate statistical ideas. And so if they're able to communicate the idea, I think that the way the rubric is laid out encourages them to not just communicate the idea, but also to recognize where someone else is coming from so that they are able to respond. Because we know that in authentic situations, people can say things that sound valid, but if you're able to uncover what might be invalid about somebody's line of thinking or the way that they're conceptualizing something, that is really the value and the benefit of having a good grasp of statistical inference. So another example for discussion boards, that one valued students being able to summarize and consolidate ideas that they've read about and that they've seen. I use discussion boards also to elicit ideas and for students to be able to recognize what might be a developing conception, what might not be quite valid, and respond to it so that somebody could maybe learn from that experience or see things a different way. I find that my students are a little bit anxious to post something on their own without a model or without having something to build on. And I found that if I waited for students, sometimes I never got to that point where they were able to recognize something that was incorrect or needed a little bit of tweaking. So what I decided to do was to start seeding these conversations by posting two students' ideas, one of which I've embedded a misconception or a developing conception so that students did have that practice in identifying where students' line of thinking is valid and solid and where maybe it needs to be revised a little bit. So I give an example of that here. And then students are asked to describe the student that they agree most with and identify what might be invalid about what the other student is thinking. The last thing I wanted to bring up is some instructors choose to use facilitators, so choose to have roles in the discussion as well. And this can sort of help some of that social interaction where students know that they have to respond to each other, but having somebody who is leading that in a gentle way might be helpful for the students who are in that online class where the engagement maybe isn't structured as well as maybe it should be. Our online statistics classes are 8 weeks fully online. Students never have to meet at a synchronous time. So there's a lot of like fluffiness there where we don't actually get students necessarily doing the same thing at the same time. So one way I tried to rein that in a bit was to have this expectation that students would be on a rotation to be a discussion facilitator in their group. One person per week would have that role. And instead of doing one specific discussion board activity, instead what their job was to consolidate the ideas of the class that they were seeing in the discussion boards and present maybe a 1 or 2 paragraph summary that connected it back to the main ideas for the week. And that's something that I did alongside with the student. So I would get in touch with the discussion facilitator by email or by phone and just talk through what I saw in the discussion boards, raising pointed questions to hopefully get to the heart of things that they should comment on for students to be able to actually have like a closing experience. And I think it gets to that idea that we don't want the instructor alone to be the holder of authority over the subject. And this was a way for me to try to spread that out a little bit and show students that they too could be authorities of statistical thinking. So that is a few ideas that I had about discussion forums. If you had specific questions about discussion forums, we can, I don't know, based on time, maybe address them now, or we will have a breakout room where we sort of walk through the design of some aspect of your discussion forum that you want to look at based on some of the ideas that you're seeing here or interactions that you may have with others. So feel free to drop those in the chat. I'm going to go look at the chat now or voice them if you'd like. All right. Hearing none, I'll pass this back over to Anelise. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Let me try to share my screen here, just 1 second. All right. All right. So now I'm going to provide a little bit different assignment than what Jen was talking about. And this type of assignment is called collaborative keys. So collaborative keys, they are just Google Doc files that you put some statistical questions in there. And you hope that students will jump in and start populating and answering those questions. I've heard about collaborative keys in at the University of Minnesota, and they had a bio intro statistic course with graduate students, and that's what they were doing. So to engage students, they had this idea of students have activities, and we went to create like the rubric for the activities, but it was students who were creating the rubric. That's the whole idea of the collaborative key. So it was just an opportunity for students to actually take charge of this and provide their answers. The instructor will go in, would make comments, so that was the big structure of the assignment. And I thought it was great, So I started teaching online in 2018. So that was before COVID. And I'm like, that sounds great. I can have like still interaction with students and between students in the collaborative key setting. So I said, I'll do it. Let's try to do it. So the big picture of my course was every week was the same. And the week started with like all the due dates. Then I gave the students the option to read or watch videos from the textbook. And I was using the same textbook as last time. So Introduction to Statistical Investigation, where some of the authors are here. And after that, they had the option of either reading or watching the videos. I did make them accountable for doing that, and I had a reading quiz. And then there was two activities that students had to complete every week. For every activity, I would provide a PDF. Students will provide the answers to every question and upload the answers. As soon as they did this, the collaborative key link was available, and students were supposed to go in and provide the answer to one of the questions. For every activity, I always made available some wrap-up videos where I will go through some of the questions in the activity. Usually, the most important questions are questions that I think they might struggle. So they had to do this for the first two activities, and then at the end of the week, there was a homework, and I always had a question forum with just if students had any question, they could post it there. So what was the collaborative key look like? Well, I did the same thing that the people at the University of Minnesota was doing. So I took all questions from the activities and I put them in a Google Doc. And then I told students, like, your job is to go in and you need to make two contributions. The first contribution is just provide an answer to one of the questions. And then I will go in, provide some feedback. And then the second contribution was either responding to me or providing an answer to another question or providing a comment about an answer that was provided by another student. So if student had those two contributions, they got full points. So it was just based on completion. And I did see a lot of interactions between, not a lot actually, but some interactions between me and the professor. And I loved what Jen was saying, like, we don't want to be the only authority. Like, I know, no, let students, like, they know this stuff. They're learning with us. So I really like that. But what I noticed is it didn't happen a lot in this type of setting. So you can see an example here where a student provided an initial answer. I provided some feedback, and then other students jump in. Anyway, a lot of times it was me doing a lot of the work, which is not ideal. But anyway, for this to work, I had to make sure the schedule was good. So their first contribution was due Monday, and then I will jump in on Wednesday morning, provide feedback, and then on Wednesday night, students had to provide their second contribution. This was for the first activity, the first collaborative key. For the second one, they did the same thing on Thursday and Friday. So I had to be ready on Thursday morning and Wednesday morning. I'm sorry, on Wednesday morning and Friday morning to provide the feedback for the students so that they could go in. But the reality is things did not work well. That's just the truth about what happened in 2018. I noticed that a lot of times the conversations that I would have with the students would be so superficial, or sometimes students would ignore each other, in terms of answers that were provided. And then I thought about it. I'm like, man, I'm working with undergraduate students here. I'm not working with graduate students like the people from Minnesota were. So I need to think like, how can I get them to participate? Because they don't have the same attitudes towards statistics. They don't have the same interest in those courses. So I said, okay, I need to adapt. What could I do? And these were some of the things that I changed. So instead of having one collaborative key for the whole class, I actually assigned students to work in groups of 3. And then I had one collaborative key for each group. Instead of having all 30 to 35 questions in the collaborative key, I just had a few questions, like 4, 5, 6 questions. And those, again, were the questions that I cared more about. So maybe an answer to the research question or a question that I thought students would struggle. And I changed the format. And the format was now you need to provide your initial answers, you need to discuss your initial answers, and you need to provide a final group answer. And that final group answer would be graded on correctness. So I did change the type of grading of the system here too. And it was very cool to see a lot of interactions between the students because I was not present in this different setting of the collaborative key. So here is an example. So I had a couple of questions. This was one of the questions in the collaborative key. Student provided their initial answers. Then they had some sort of discussion about those initial answers. And here was a final group answer that would be graded on correctness. One thing that is important is you need to provide as much directions as you can for your students. So even this thing of like use different colors when you're posting your answer, or even this discussion part, if you don't tell them what you want to see, then you're most likely going to see very superficial things. Unfortunately, that's the reality in an undergraduate course. So I actually gave very clear instructions in the syllabus. So I expect you to read and compare your initial answers, identify and correct any mistakes, and reflect on what is different among the answers. And I said, if you find a mistake in your answer, please tell me that, write that. What was the mistake? How can you correct it? And if you found a mistake in someone else's answer, then politely try to help that person to come up with the right answer without giving it away. And I did tell the students, you all need to provide some input for the final group answer that will be graded on correctness. And I had a little comment. This is the most important part of the collaborative key. So I want to see thoughtful answers, not superficial answers. And by the way, this is something that I added in like my third time teaching the course because I was still seeing some a little bit not ideal answers. For this to work, again, you need to think carefully about the schedule. And again, everything I'm doing is under like an asynchronous setting that I'm talking about these assignments. So initial answers were due Monday night, and then they had Tuesday and Wednesday, the whole day to work on the collaborative keys with their group members. And then for the second collaborative key, initial answers were due Wednesday night, and they had until Friday to work with their group members on the collaborative key. One thing that is different in this new setting is I did add a lack of participation report here because if students are working, if you want students to work together in a good way, collaboratively, with not having anyone like taking the load from the other people, then we want to make sure that students are still individually accountable for participating in that setting. So I did have a lack of participation report, and I told students, your group members are supposed to provide their answers, participate in the discussion, provide inputs. So I had like a list of things that I wanted them to do. And then I told them, if one of your group members is not doing this, please let me know. No, and sometimes this would happen, and I will go in and try to help the students. But long story short, this worked so much better with my population of undergraduate statistics students in an intro course, right? And this was social science students. That was my population. I saw students helping each other. I saw some statistical communication happening that was great, like Jen was saying, like this is part of what we want to see in the course. We saw some interesting social interactions too. By the end of the course, the groups kind of stuck together and they were more comfortable saying like, oh, I think I made a mistake on this one. And it was actually very exciting to see some of the responses. I'm actually doing research on this and we're finding some good things. Um, what are some of the lessons that I learned in this process? The grading part is important, right? Students pay attention to kind of the things that we value, and sometimes the things we value are the things that we put a grade on, and not always. But what I noticed is the grading part was important, so grading the final group answer as a correctness type grading, that was important. I actually, if students provided an initial answer, I don't care at that moment if the answer was wrong. I just wanted them to participate, so that was graded on completion. And then more recently, last year, I started being a little more picky about their discussion. So if students were not like providing posts where they're actually reflecting on their answer or helping other group members, I would make a comment on that. And usually, if you kind of grade students on the first 3 weeks of the quarter, they learn this, and the rest of the course much more smooth. Of course, when we talk about grading, we talk about how tired we are and how hard it is. So one of the things that I did to be able to make this work is I did not grade all the questions in the collaborative key. Maybe I graded 2 questions or maybe 3 questions. So this is a way that we can make like the grading load to be lower. Something else, grading end of unit, grading making students accountable for watching the videos. So it's not only did you watch it or not, but like, did you pay attention to what you watched? And then I added a statistical question at the end where it was just a statistical question about something I talked. So if students watch the video, they will be able to do that. Another lesson I learned in the group setting of the collaborative key, the structure is not really needed. Like students were able to get to the correct answer most of the time, and it was actually pretty cool. I was still present in terms of the wrap-up videos that students had, so I was still indirectly present. For the whole class collaborative key, the presence of the instructor is very important. You know, providing the feedback, helping the students to go on, and like even asking follow-up questions. So these were some of the questions that I learned, some of the things that I learned. And finally, if you want students to work together, what I noticed is I needed to encourage them to do this. So the first week of my quarter was just getting students to get to know each other, asking students to create a plan of how they're going to work together. So like, these are the deadlines. How are you going to work together? You know, that's kind of part of the setting of this collaborative key to make it work. And so far, I've used one group throughout the quarter, and I think I might change this in the future because, you know, sometimes we do see some hard things in group settings. As I mentioned, I'm working on research here. We have two papers that were out, and we're still learning more about this, and it's been exciting, some of the things that we're seeing. So I'm going to skip the part for questions because we're running a little bit. We still have around 21 minutes, and we want to make sure that you get to a breakout room. And then if you have specific questions about the collaborative key, I'm happy to answer in that setting. So we're going to have two discussion forums, two breakout rooms, sorry. One of them is going to be focused on discussion forums, and another one is going to be focused on collaborative keys. So let me go back to Jen and Beth. Are we okay keeping this format? Yeah? All right. So I'm going to try to figure this out here. So I'm going to make a little, and is this the time to stop recording? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to stop recording